They called Frank Sinatra the chairman of the board, but in the smoky back rooms where real power was decided, he was something else entirely. The only man in America who could look a mob boss in the eye and make demands instead of requests. On March 3, 1962, in a dimly lit restaurant on Chicago's South Side, Frank proved exactly how far he would go to protect the people he loved. And what he said that night to Sam Giancana, the most feared man in organized crime, would either save Sammy Davis Jr. Duis' life or get them both killed. "Sam," Frank said, his voice steady as steel, "Sammy is under my protection. Anyone who touches him touches me. And you know what happens to people who touch me." This wasn't bravado. This wasn't Hollywood posturing. This was Frank Sinatra putting his life on the line for his friend. And in a world where the wrong word could end up with you in a shallow grave, it was either the bravest thing anyone had ever done or the stupidest. To understand the magnitude of what Frank did that night, you have to understand the world Sammy Davis Jr. lived in. Being the most talented black entertainer in America made Sammy a target from every direction. Racists hated him for his success. The mob saw him as useful but expendable. Studio executives treated him like valuable property. And in 1962, all three forces were converging on Sammy in ways that threatened to destroy him. The trouble started with Sammy's mouth. He was brilliant, charismatic, and unfortunately unable to keep his opinions to himself. In an era when black entertainers were expected to smile, perform, and stay silent about everything else, Sammy had the audacity to speak his mind about civil rights, politics, and the treatment of black performers in America. This made him dangerous to people who preferred their black entertainers grateful and quiet. The specific incident that put Sammy's life in danger involved a poker game at the Cal Neva Lodge, a casino that Frank partially owned and that served as neutral ground for meetings between entertainers and organized crime figures. During a high-stakes game in February 1962, Sammy had won $85,000 from Vincent "the Fish" Cafaro, a captain in the Genovese crime family. Cafaro was a man who solved problems with violence, and losing that much money to a black man in front of witnesses was not just a financial blow, it was a humiliation that demanded retribution. "That little monkey thinks he can take my money and laugh about it," Cafaro told his associates. "Nobody embarrass Vincent Cafaro and walks away, especially not some uppity Negro who forgets his place." Word reached Sammy that Cafaro was planning something permanent. Not just to recover the money, but to send a message about what happened to black entertainers who got too comfortable around white mobsters. Sammy was terrified, but he had nowhere to turn. The police couldn't protect him from the mob. His management was powerless against organized crime. The only person with enough influence to intervene was Frank Sinatra, and asking Frank for help meant admitting weakness to the man whose approval Sammy craved more than anything. But Sammy was desperate enough to swallow his pride. The call came at 2 a.m. on March 2, 1962. Frank was in his compound in Palm Springs when his private phone rang. Only a handful of people had that number, and none of them called at 2 a.m. unless someone was dying. "Frank," Sammy's voice was shaking with fear and exhaustion. "I need help." Frank sat up immediately. He'd heard Sammy scared before, but this was different. This was panic. "What happened?" "I'm in trouble with Cafaro. Bad trouble. He's talking about permanent solutions." Frank was quiet for a long moment, calculating the risks and the options. Getting involved in mob business was dangerous even for him. But letting Sammy face this alone was unthinkable. "Where are you?" "Chicago, hiding in a hotel room." "Stay there. Don't go anywhere, don't talk to anyone, I'm coming." Frank hung up and immediately called his pilot. Within 2 hours, his private jet was airborne, carrying Frank toward what could be either his greatest triumph or his final mistake. The meeting was arranged for the following evening at Armando's, a restaurant on Chicago's South Side that served as an unofficial headquarters for the Chicago outfit. Frank arrived alone, which was either a sign of respect or a death wish, depending on how you looked at it. Sam Giancana was already there, waiting in a private dining room with Vincent Cafaro and 2 other men whose presence was meant to intimidate. Giancana was the head of the Chicago outfit, a man who controlled unions, politicians, and judges. He was also, notably, one of the few people in organized crime who considered Frank Sinatra an equal rather than an employee. "Frankie," Giancana said, not getting up from his chair. "Long way to come for a conversation. Some conversations are worth the trip, Sam." Frank sat down across from Giancana, nodding politely to the other men as if they were meeting at a country club instead of a mob stronghold. "I hear you got a problem with my friend," Frank said, looking directly at Cafaro. Cafaro's face flushed red. "Your friend cheated me out of 85 grand and had the nerve to smile about it. Nobody takes Vincent Cafaro's money without consequences." "He won it fair and square in a poker game," Frank replied calmly. "You were there. You saw the cards. Unless you're saying you can't afford to lose, in which case maybe you shouldn't be playing with the big boys." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Questioning a mobster's finances was the kind of thing that got people killed, but Frank delivered it with such casual confidence that Cafaro was momentarily speechless. Giancana leaned forward, intrigued. "Frankie, this isn't really your business. Your boy took money from one of my captains. That's between them." This was the moment Frank had been building toward. The moment when he would either save Sammy or doom them both. "Actually, Sam, it is my business. Sammy Davis Jr. is under my protection. He's part of my family. And you know how I feel about family." The room went silent. Frank wasn't just asking for a favor. He was invoking the unwritten rules of mob protection, the code that said attacking someone under a boss's protection was equivalent to attacking the boss himself. But Frank wasn't a boss. He was an entertainer, albeit a powerful one. He had no soldiers, no territory, no traditional power base. What he had was something more valuable: access. Access to politicians, to celebrities, to the kind of legitimacy that mob bosses craved but could never quite achieve. "You're vouching for him?" Giancana asked. "I'm doing more than vouching. I'm putting my name on it. Anyone who hurts Sammy answers to me personally." Cafaro couldn't contain himself any longer. "You think you can protect that monkey? You think your name means anything to me?" Frank turned slowly to look at Cafaro, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Frank spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone had to lean in to hear him. "Vincent, let me explain something to you. Sammy Davis Jr. has performed for presidents. He's friends with senators and congressmen and judges. He's got more connections in Washington than you'll ever dream of. But more importantly, he's my friend. And I protect my friends." Frank paused, letting the words sink in. "Now you can try to hurt Sammy if you want. But if you do, those same politicians who shake his hand will suddenly become very interested in your business operations. Those same judges who laugh at his jokes will start looking very closely at your legal problems. And those same FBI agents who ignore you now will suddenly remember where you live." It was a masterful threat, couched in language that sounded almost polite, but carried the promise of complete destruction. Frank was reminding everyone in the room that his power came not from violence, but from legitimacy, and that legitimacy could be weaponized just as effectively as muscle. Giancana understood immediately. "Frankie's right, Vincent. The boy's connected, too connected to touch without creating problems for all of us." But Cafaro wasn't ready to back down. "He still owes me respect. And my money." Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the table in front of Cafaro. "There's your 85,000, Frank said. "Consider it a gift from me to you. But this is the last time anyone in this organization has a problem with Sammy Davis Jr. Are we clear?" The gesture was simultaneously generous and insulting. Frank was buying Sammy's safety, but he was also implying that Cafaro couldn't afford to lose the money he'd gambled away. Cafaro picked up the envelope, his pride bruised but his practical side recognizing that this was the best deal he was going to get. Giancana spoke for everyone. Sammy Davis Jr. is off limits. Anyone who touches him without my direct authorization will answer to me. Understood?" The protection Frank secured that night went beyond just Vincent Cafaro. He had essentially made Sammy untouchable throughout the Chicago outfit's sphere of influence, which extended far beyond Chicago itself. But the protection came with a price that Frank never fully calculated. By vouching for Sammy so publicly, Frank had tied his own reputation to his friend's behavior. Any trouble Sammy got into would reflect on Frank, and in the mob world, credibility once lost was almost impossible to regain. Frank also knew that the $85,000 he'd paid was just the beginning. Protecting Sammy would be an ongoing expense, paid not just in money but in favors, obligations, and political capital. But to Frank, it was worth it. Sammy wasn't just a friend, he was family. And Frank Sinatra would move mountains to protect his family. The aftermath of that Chicago meeting revealed the true extent of Frank's power and the depth of his loyalty. Sammy never knew the specifics of what Frank had done, but he understood that his life had been saved by his friend's intervention. "I knew Frank was powerful," Sammy told a confidant years later, "but I didn't know he was powerful enough to make the mob back down. That night, I realized Frank wasn't just the chairman of the board in show business. He was the chairman of the board, period." The protection Frank arranged lasted for the rest of Sammy's life. Even after Frank's own relationship with organized crime became more complicated, even after the Kennedy administration turned against the mob and Frank was forced to distance himself from his underworld connections, Sammy remained untouchable. It was a testament to Frank's word being his bond, even in the dangerous world of organized crime. But the story also reveals the moral complexities of Frank's relationships. To save one friend, he had to maintain relationships with people who were genuinely evil. To protect Sammy from mob violence, Frank had to become more deeply embedded in the mob world himself. The price of protection was corruption, and Frank paid it willingly because the alternative, losing Sammy, was unthinkable. The meeting at Armando's restaurant was never reported in newspapers. The FBI files that documented Frank's mob connections never mentioned it. But among the people who mattered, the mobsters, the entertainers, the insiders who understood how power really worked, the story became legend. Frank Sinatra had faced down the mob to protect his friend. He had risked his life, his career, and his reputation for Sammy Davis Jr. And he had won. When Frank Sinatra died in 1998, Sammy had been gone for 8 years. But those who knew both men said that Sammy's death in 1990 had taken something out of Frank, some essential part of him that never recovered. "Frank loved a lot of people," one friend observed, "but he would have died for Sammy, and I think losing Sammy was like losing a part of his own soul." The story of Frank's intervention with the Chicago mob is more than just a tale of friendship. It's a window into a world where loyalty was literally a matter of life and death, where the right word could save a life and the wrong word could end it. It's also a reminder that even in the darkest corners of American society, friendship could triumph over fear, love could overcome hatred, and one man's courage could change everything. Frank Sinatra used his power many ways throughout his life. He used it to advance his career, to access the highest levels of society, to live a life of unimaginable luxury and privilege. But on March 3, 1962, in a restaurant on Chicago's South Side, Frank Sinatra used his power in the most important way possible, to save his friend's life. And in doing so, he proved that all the fame and fortune in the world mean nothing if you don't use them to protect the people you love.